The encrypted channel crackled once. Then Colonel Dennis Farrow's voice came through. Flat, certain, final. All units, this is actual. Lieutenant Soren Vale is KIA. Confirm and log. Stripper access codes from the system, effective immediately. Nobody in the operations room spoke. Nobody questioned it. One communications sergeant reached for his keyboard. His hands did not shake. In this building, you learned very quickly that hands were not allowed to shake. He typed 4 letters. KIA. Pressed enter. And somewhere on a server in Virginia, Soren Vale ceased to exist. 58 hours later, a woman walked out of the Somali bush. Alone. Except for the dog. The German shepherd moved at her left knee with the kind of stillness that only came from an animal that had been through something it couldn't name. His coat, black and gold, the color of a flag at half-mast, was matted with red dust and something darker. His eyes swept the perimeter of Camp Baledogle's outer fence with automatic precision. Not the fence, not the base, the people. He was cataloging every face. The woman's name was Soren Vale. She was supposed to be dead. She was carrying a sealed evidence pouch in her left hand. She did not yet know what was inside it. That was the worst part. She had been carrying her own destruction for 58 hours, and she didn't know it yet. The gate guard saw her first. He raised his binoculars. Lowered them, raised them again, because the first look hadn't made sense, and the second one wasn't going to either. Tower 2, single individual, foot approach, southern tree line, female, armed. She has a dog. What kind of dog? He looked through the glass again. The dog was not looking at the fence, not at the base, not at the vehicle yard or the communications tower, or any of the things the dog was supposed to look at when approaching an unfamiliar perimeter. It was looking at him. Through 200 meters of heat shimmer, that animal had found his face and locked on. German shepherd, black saddle. Sir, he's not moving. He's just watching me. Silence on the channel. Then a different voice, older. The kind of older that had nothing left to be surprised by. That's Koda. A beat. Open the gate. Sergeant Major Diana Osei was already moving before the order finished transmitting. 14 months at Camp Baledogle. She had watched good people come in on stretchers and better people come in sealed. She had filed the paperwork on Soren Vale herself, had triple-checked the coordinates, read Farrow's after-action report twice, looking for the inconsistency she could feel in her chest but couldn't locate on the page. She had not found it, because it wasn't there to find. It had been removed. She didn't know that yet either. Now she pushed through the crowd at the main gate and stopped because Soren Vale was standing 10 meters inside the wire. Still, not moving toward the medical tent, not moving toward anyone. She was looking past the crowd, past the vehicles, past the communications tower. She was looking at Colonel Farrow's office window on the second floor of the operations building. The window was dark, but the blinds moved. Just once. Just enough. She needs a medic. Osei's voice cut through the noise before her brain caught up with her mouth. The crowd reorganized. A medic team pushed forward. Soren held up one hand. Koda first. Her voice was raw, scraped down to the words themselves. Nothing extra. The medic hesitated. Ma'am, you have a laceration on your, Koda first. The dog sat at her left knee, square. Still. His eyes never stopped moving. Veterinary Technician Corporal Inez Roth knelt beside him, kit already open. Her hands moved to his left foreleg where the fur was darkest. He didn't flinch. He kept watching the crowd. Through and through, on the left foreleg, clean. Someone field dressed this. I did, 40 hours ago. With what? Paracord. MRE spoon heated in a lighter. Roth looked up. Soren had already turned away. Her eyes were back on Farrow's window. Osei fell into step beside her. She didn't ask where she had been. She didn't ask how she had survived. She asked the only question that mattered. Who knows you're back? Soren's jaw tightened. Everyone who just watched me walk through that gate. Besides them. 3 steps. Red dust rising around their boots. That's what I need to find out. She pressed the evidence pouch tighter against her side. She still didn't know. She still thought she was carrying the thing that would save her. 96 hours earlier. The annex was the ugliest building on base. No windows, one door. A keypad that changed codes every 72 hours. A satellite uplink on the roof that hummed at a frequency you felt in your back teeth if you stood too close. Soren Vale had spent more time inside this building than in her own quarters. She was 26 years old. She was the best intelligence analyst in the Horn of Africa theater. She also had a flaw that Pharaoh had identified in their very first meeting and had spent 4 years carefully, methodically using. She trusted completely or not at all. There was no middle ground in her. Pharaoh had called it a gift. You commit, he had told her once, over bad coffee in a Djibouti City cafe with the ceiling fan turning too slowly overhead. Most analysts hedge. They qualify everything. You decide and you commit. That's rare. She had taken it as a compliment. It was a blueprint. Tonight she was staring at a map. Southern Somalia. The corridor between the Juba River and the Kenyan border. 17 red markers, each one a location where compromised intelligence had been acted upon in the past 8 months. Ambushes, failed extractions. 3 special operations teams walked into situations they should have seen coming. She knew the names of the people who hadn't walked out. She had memorized them, all of them. She memorized everything completely, involuntarily, like a machine that couldn't be switched off. Sometimes she thought that was the loneliest thing about her. Koda was asleep under her desk. He slept the way military dogs slept. Not deeply, not completely. One ear always rotating. His breathing the only sound that made the annex feel less like a sealed box. He had been assigned to her 18 months ago. The K9 coordinator had called it mutually selected, the official term for what happened when a dog refused 3 other handlers and then walked directly to Soren's side and sat down without being told. She had never understood why he had chosen her. She suspected, on the bad nights, that it was because he recognized something in her that she couldn't see in herself. The door opened at 0312. She didn't look up. She knew the footsteps. 14 months of adjacent desks had taught her the particular rhythm of James Okafor moving through a room, unhurried, precise. The walk of someone who had long ago decided that urgency was mostly theater. He set a cup on the edge of her workstation without being asked. Bad coffee, the only kind available at this hour. Still chasing the same 17? He said. He leaned against the desk beside her, looking at the map. Not performing interest, actually looking. That was the thing about Okafor. He looked at problems the way she did, not at the markers themselves, but at the space between them. The pattern shifted last week. The gap between compromise and action used to be 72 hours. Now it's down to 48. Someone upstream got impatient, or confident. He considered this. Show me the cross-reference, he said. She pulled up the method, the shortcut she had developed over 4 months of working this desk, the particular way of layering SIGINT data across classification tiers that cut processing time by 1/3. She had never written it down. It existed only in her hands, and now, in the 40 minutes she spent walking Okafor through it. He caught it fast, faster than she expected. If you run it against the insertion windows instead of the compromise dates, he said, you tighten the attribution by 2 days. I know. I haven't had time to rebuild the query. I'll do it. Give me the morning. She looked at him for a moment. Under the desk, Koda had lifted his head. He was looking at Okafor with the specific quality of attention he reserved for things he had not yet made a decision about. Not alert, not relaxed. Somewhere in between, the posture of an animal collecting information before committing to a verdict. Thanks, she said. Okafor picked up his coffee and walked back to his desk. Koda watched him go. Then he put his head back down. She returned to the map. She did not notice that Koda had not fully closed his eyes. Her secure terminal pinged at 0347. She looked at the message. Read it twice. A set of GPS coordinates. A 6-hour window. 4 words. Go alone, don't log. From Pharaoh. She should have questioned it. She knew that. The rule existed for exactly this reason. Because orders that came from people you trusted were the most dangerous kind. Because trust was not evidence. Because 4 years of good judgment did not guarantee a 5th. She knew all of this. She sat at her terminal for 6 minutes. Koda woke up. He didn't move. just opened his eyes and watched her. "It's Pharaoh," she told him, as if that explained it. As if that settled it. She logged out of the terminal. She did not log the mission. She picked up her kit. That was the second mistake. The first had been made 4 years ago in a Georgetown lecture hall, when a man with kind eyes and 20 years of decorated service had sat down across from her and told her she had a particular kind of mind. She had believed him completely. She still did. That was exactly the problem. South of Baledogle, the land killed confidence. It looked flat from the air. On the ground, it was a constant negotiation. Dry riverbeds appearing without warning. Thorn scrub that grabbed at gear. Red laterite soil that held footprints like concrete and radiated heat like a griddle by midday. Soren moved fast in the dark. Koda ranged 15 meters ahead, always returning. His tracking harness pinged her wrist unit every 90 seconds. She found the cache exactly where the coordinates said. A buried waterproof case, military grade. She broke the seal. Inside, a hard drive, sealed in static packaging. A handwritten note on top, Pharaoh's handwriting. She would have recognized it anywhere. Everything is on here. The buyer, the transfers, the dead drops. 8 months of documentation. "I built this and I couldn't get it out. They're watching my channels. You're the only one clean enough to carry it. Contact in Kismayo. Name on the drive. He'll get you extraction. Trust no one until you're out." She read it once. She put the drive and the note in her left breast pocket, and she made herself not think about the questions already forming at the back of her mind. Because this was Pharaoh, and she trusted him completely, or not at all. She chose completely. One more time. Koda's posture changed before she heard anything. One frame, loose and alert, then drawn tight, every muscle. His gaze locked onto the tree line 30 meters northeast. He didn't make a sound. He never made a sound when it was real. Soren dropped. The first round hit the container where her head had been. She moved fast and low into the dry riverbed using the bank as cover. Her mind ran the geometry automatically. 2 shooters, elevated, northeast tree line. Sound had the flat quality of fire from above, which meant there was probably a third position she couldn't identify yet. Koda, heel. He was already at her left knee. They ran. Behind her, voices. Somali, clipped, coordinated. Not random fighters, not opportunistic. These were people who had been positioned and waiting. They had known she would be here, at these coordinates, at this time, alone. She ran. She did not let herself finish the thought. Not yet. She was not ready for what it meant. 3 hours later, she found cover. A collapsed stone enclosure. 4 walls, half a roof. The smell of old ash and dry earth. She pressed her back against the coolest wall and took stock. Ammunition. 2 full magazines, 11 rounds loose. Water, 1.5 liters. Communication. Primary radio destroyed round through the housing. Secondary was short range. Useless at this distance. Camp Baledogle was 47 kilometers north. Medical. Graze on her right forearm. Noticed only when she stopped moving. Bleeding controlled. Koda. Present. Alert. A long gash along his left foreleg from the first minute of the ambush, already field-dressed, already clotting. He sat beside her with his shoulder against her left knee and watched the entrance. She looked at the hard drive in her hand. She looked at the note, and she made herself, slowly, carefully, the way Pharaoh had taught her. Read it again as intelligence rather than as a message from someone she loved. I built this over 8 months. 8 months! The first compromised operation had been logged 9 months ago. They're watching my channels. Pharaoh had 17 secure channels. Any of them could have moved data without a physical handoff. You're the only one clean enough. There were senior officers, experienced field handlers, people with more extraction contacts in the region and less exposure. But there was no one who would walk into an unlogged mission alone. No one except her. She sat with it. She put the drive back in her pocket. She stood up. She checked her compass. 47 kilometers north. We move, she told Koda. Not because she had figured it out, because moving was the only thing she could control right now. The truth could wait until she was close enough to look him in the eye. She still believed there would be an explanation. Pharaoh had known she would. That was the point. The sun came up like an accusation. No gradual warming. No gentle light spreading across the horizon the way it did in photographs of this continent taken by people who had never been afraid here. Just darkness. And then a hard, orange line, splitting the sky open. And then heat. Immediate. Total. The kind that pressed against exposed skin like a hand that wouldn't move. Soren walked north. She counted steps when her mind started to drift. Not out loud. In the back of her skull. Behind everything else. A metronome that kept her upright when the rest of her wanted to stop being upright. 4,212. 4,213. Koda moved beside her left leg. His gait had changed in the last hour. A slight compensation. His weight shifting fractionally away from the dressed foreleg. Not enough to slow him. Enough for her to notice. She noticed everything about him. That was the arrangement they had settled into without ever discussing it. She watched him. He watched everything else. It had kept them both alive more than once. By hour 5, the water was down to a quarter liter. She had rationed it the way the training manual prescribed. Small amounts at intervals, never enough to feel satisfied, always enough to keep the body functional. The manual had been written by people who had studied dehydration in controlled environments. This was not a controlled environment. Her mouth tasted like copper and dust. The graze on her forearm had stopped bleeding and started pulling, the particular tightness of a wound beginning to close in dry heat, drawing the skin around it into something that felt wrong. She did not stop. Stopping was a decision she couldn't afford to make yet. By hour 7, her counting broke down. Not gradually, just gone. She reached for the number, and it wasn't there. She had been at 6,000 and something, and then her mind had slipped sideways for a moment, and when she came back, the count was gone. She stopped. Koda stopped with her. She stood in the open ground and made herself breathe, and tried to reconstruct the number from her pace, and the position of the sun, and the distance she estimated she had covered since the last identifiable landmark. She couldn't. That was new. That was the dehydration talking. She looked at the remaining water. A quarter liter, maybe less. She looked at Koda. His tongue was working harder than it had been an hour ago. His left foreleg was compensating again. The field dressing holding, but the body underneath it, making its own calculations. She unscrewed the cap, poured half into her cupped hand. He lapped it without breaking his watch of the perimeter. She drank the rest. Both of them stood there for a moment, taking stock of what they had and what they didn't. Then she picked a landmark on the northern horizon and started counting again from 1. At hour 6, Koda froze. Not the combat freeze of the ambush. That was fast. Electric. Every muscle snapping to attention like a current running through him. This was different. Slower. He stopped walking and simply stood, his nose lifting, working the air with a focus so complete it looked almost mechanical. His tail moved once. Low. Controlled. But it moved. Soren had learned over 18 months to read that tail the way a sailor read wind. High and stiff meant threat. Low and still meant unknown. One slow movement meant something that was not a threat. Something that was alive. "Show me," she said quietly. He moved east off her direct line of travel. She followed. The boy was maybe 14. He was sitting in the shade of a dead acacia tree with his back against the trunk and his knees pulled up, and a plastic water container, the 5-liter kind, pale blue, the kind sold in every market from Mogadishu to Nairobi, sitting between his feet. He looked at Soren. He looked at Koda. He did not run. That told her something. A child alone in this corridor, who didn't run from an armed foreign woman and a military dog, had either seen too much to be surprised by anything, or had been told to expect something like this. She couldn't tell yet which one it was. "Do you speak English?" she asked. She kept her hands visible, weapon down. He studied her for a long moment. "My uncle does. He said to wait here. He said someone might come from the south." The back of her neck went cold despite the heat. "Who is your uncle?" "His name is not for me to say." He picked up the water container and held it out. Koda looked at it, looked at Soren, looked back at the boy. "It's clean. He said to tell you that too." She drank, not because she trusted the situation, because she had 41 kilometers still to cover and a body that was beginning to negotiate terms she couldn't accept. The boy watched her drink. He watched Koda accept water from his cupped hands with the gravity of someone performing a ritual he'd been taught to take seriously. Your dog. He is hurt. He's fine. He is hurt. Not correcting her. Just stating a fact he considered important enough to say twice. She capped the water container. Your uncle. He told you someone might come from the south. Did he tell you anything else? The boy was quiet for a moment. He said to tell you, he began slowly, like he was reciting something memorized, that the thing you are carrying is not what you were told it is. The air went out of the morning. He said you should know that before you take it back. Soren's hand moved to the evidence pouch before she could stop it. Not to open it, just to touch it, to confirm it was still there. Who is your uncle? She asked again. A man who used to work with men like the ones who sent you out here. Used to. He stopped. When he found out what the work actually was. She studied him. 14 years old, maybe. A water container and a memorized message in the shade of a dead tree, in a corridor that Mamaisam patrols avoided and civilians crossed, only when they had no other choice. Nobody put a child here by accident. Tell your uncle that I need to meet him. The boy shook his head. He said you would say that. He said to tell you there is no time. He said. He stopped, looked down at his hands. He said to tell you the name on the drive is not a contact. It's a witness, and the witness is already dead. She left the boy with the water container and moved northeast. Not because the boy's uncle had earned her trust, because the alternative was walking 41 kilometers north, carrying something she no longer understood, handing it to people she could no longer be certain about, in a base where her commanding officer had declared her dead before her body was cold. She needed to know what was on the drive. She had carried it for 6 hours, thinking it was a weapon pointed at the people who had tried to kill her. Now she was beginning to understand it might be pointed somewhere else entirely. The man was exactly where the boy's directions had placed him. 60, maybe older. Somali. Sitting on an ammunition crate with the comfort of someone who had been sitting on ammunition crates his entire adult life. He wore civilian clothes that had been washed so many times the color was a memory. His hands, resting on his knees, were the hands of someone who had done technical work. Fine motor precision, written into the way he held them still. Beside him, a ruggedized laptop, old, battered, running on a portable battery pack. He looked at Soren for a long time before he spoke. You're younger than I expected. His English was British inflected, precise. Pharaoh said you were exceptional. He wasn't wrong. Exceptional people are the only ones worth using. Using, she repeated. Sit down. What I have to show you will be easier if you're already sitting. His name, he told her, was Abdi. He had worked for 11 years as a technical analyst for a private intelligence contractor based in Nairobi, one of the dozens of firms that orbited American military operations in the region, doing the work that official channels couldn't be seen doing: signal interception, source cultivation, the gray business of information in a gray part of the world. 3 months ago, he had been handed a data architecture assignment. Build a file system, his supervisor had told him. Clean, layered, believable. Time-stamped across a 22-month window. What kind of files? Abdi said, telling her the story with the flatness of someone who had already processed the horror of it and come out the other side into something colder. Communications logs, transfer records, dead drop coordinates, the full documentation of an intelligence leak, names, dates, amounts, methods. A fabricated leak, Soren said. A fabricated leak. He nodded. Attribution, ready. Everything pointing to a single source. A single person who had access to all of it. Clearance level, posting history, operational exposure, everything consistent. He turned the laptop to face her. On the screen, a personnel file. Her photograph looked back at her. The world did not tilt. The ground did not move. Her heart rate ticked up, 4 beats per minute. Her hands stayed still. Koda pressed his shoulder against her left knee. She read the file. She read it the way Pharaoh had taught her to read everything, not for what it said, but for what it was constructed to say. The architecture of it, the way each piece supported the next, interlocking, self-reinforcing, designed to be read by someone who was already looking for confirmation rather than truth. 22 months of fabricated intelligence transfers. Her name on every one. Her access codes, the real ones, pulled from the actual system, embedded throughout. And at the center of it, 17 operations compromised. 17 red markers on a map she had been staring at for weeks, certain they were the evidence of someone else's crime. They were the evidence of hers. Or they would be. The moment that drive arrived at Camp Baledogle in her hands. "How long have you had this?" she asked. "I completed the build 6 weeks ago. I was told it was a counterintelligence exercise, a stress test of the attribution system." "When did you know it wasn't?" "When my supervisor was killed in a car accident in Nairobi, 3 days after I delivered the completed file. And when I looked at the name, the file was built around." He paused. "I know people who served with you in Stuttgart. You are not this person." "No, I'm not." She was still looking at her own photograph. She had taken that photo for her DIA credentials 4 years ago in a building in Virginia, the day after Pharaoh had formally brought her in. 4 years ago. He had started building the exit before she ever walked through the door. That was the moment it became real. Not the ambush. Not the 47 kilometers. Not the boy under the dead tree. This. The photograph. The timestamp on the oldest fabricated file. 22 months ago. 8 months before she had even been posted to the Horn of Africa. Before she had access to any of the intelligence that had supposedly been compromised. He had built the file to accommodate her posting. He had requested her specifically for Djibouti because she fit the architecture he had already designed. She had not been recruited because she was exceptional. She had been recruited because she was useful, and she had never seen it. In 4 years of reading the space between data, of identifying patterns before the numbers confirmed them, she had never once turned that mind on the man who kept telling her how exceptional it was. "I need to copy this," she said. "Already done." Abdi reached into his jacket and produced a second drive, smaller, different casing, mirror of everything on yours, metadata intact, chain of custody documented. "Why are you doing this?" He considered the question seriously. "Because I built the cage. I did not know what it was for when I built it, but I built it." He looked at her steadily. "That is not something I can unknow." Koda had been watching the riverbank throughout the conversation. Now, his ears shifted, a small adjustment, tracking something moving upstream. "You need to go," Abdi said. He was already closing the laptop. "The witness, the contact name on the drive. The boy said he was dead 3 weeks ago. Also a car accident." Abdi stood. "Pharaoh is careful. He has been doing this for a long time. He did not expect the boy's father to have kept copies." "The boy's father," she repeated, "was the witness." She looked back in the direction they had come from. The dead acacia tree was not visible from here. The boy was somewhere behind her in the scrub, sitting with an empty water container and a dead father, and the particular composure of a child who had been told that composure was the most important thing he could offer. She pressed the second drive into the pouch alongside the first. "Tell me his name," she said. Abdi told her. She memorized it the way she memorized everything. Completely. Permanently. "I'll make sure it's in the record," she said. "I know you will. That's why I waited." She heard the vehicle at hour 12. Not close. 2, maybe 3 kilometers east, the particular diesel knock of a technical moving across hard ground without concern for being heard, moving parallel to her line of travel. She stopped. Koda stopped. He was already facing east, body low, the combat stillness that had no gradation between off and on. She did the calculation fast. If they were tracking Koda's GPS, possible. If someone had pulled the harness frequency, they would be running a parallel intercept, trying to cut her off before she reached the northern road. The technical would have 3 to 4 men. She had 11 rounds loose, and 2 magazines, and a dog with a dressed wound that had been walking on it for 7 hours. She looked at the ground between her and the vehicle sound. Thorn scrub, a dry channel running northeast. Cover, if she moved now. "Down," she said quietly. Koda dropped flat. She dropped beside him. They lay in the scrub for 9 minutes while the diesel sound moved north, paralleled their position, then continued past and faded, not tracking her or tracking wrong. Either way, she waited 2 more minutes before she moved. When she stood, her legs shook. Not dramatically, just the particular tremor of muscle that had been horizontal for 9 minutes after 7 hours of walking and had opinions about being asked to be vertical again. Koda stood with her. He took 3 steps, and his left foreleg buckled. Just once, just for a half second, before he corrected and walked on as if it had not happened. She looked at him. He looked forward. "I know," she said. "Me too." They moved. She did not think about Pharaoh until hour 14. She thought about water first, about the angle of the sun, about Koda's gait, and the way he was compensating less now than he had been. Either the field dressing was holding better, or he had simply decided that compensating was no longer worth the energy. She thought about the boy. His name, Abdi had told her, was Hersey. He lived with an aunt in a village 12 kilometers east of the main road. He had memorized the message for her because his aunt had asked him to, and because his father had told him, the last time he saw him, that there was going to come a moment when doing the right thing would be the most dangerous option available. "Do it anyway," his father had said. Hersey had been 11 when his father said that. He had been waiting 3 weeks to deliver the message. She thought about that for a long time. Then she let herself think about Pharaoh. Not the ambush, not the file, not the photograph. The small things first. The coffee in Djibouti City, the ceiling fan turning too slowly, the way he had leaned forward when she spoke, like everything she said was worth the attention he was giving it. She understood now that listening like that was a skill, that it could be practiced and deployed the same way any other tool could. That warmth, when it was used correctly, was indistinguishable from warmth. She had not applied it to herself, because he had told her she was exceptional. And somewhere beneath all the training and the discipline, there had been a person who needed to believe that was true. That person had made her a perfect instrument. She had walked into the field alone, had not logged the mission, had carried the drive 58 hours without understanding what she was carrying. Every failure point had been her. Not incompetence, design. At hour 16, Koda stopped. She stopped with him. He was looking north, not the locked threat gaze of the ambush, not the loose alert of the boy under the tree. Something between. His head was high, his body still. Then, slowly, his tail moved. The same low, controlled movement as before. Not a threat. Alive. Friendly. She raised her eyes to the northern tree line. A figure was moving toward them through the scrub, moving carefully, hands visible. She recognized the gait before she recognized the face. Sergeant Major Deanna Osei. Alone. Civilian clothes, no radio visible. Moving like someone who had made a decision that couldn't be unmade and had decided that the time for second-guessing it was over. They met in the open ground between the trees. Osei looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Koda. Then she reached into the pack on her back and produced a water bottle and a sealed field ration and held them out without a word. Soren took them. "You came alone," she said. "I filed no record of leaving the base. Nobody knows I'm out here." "That's not an answer." "No, it's not." She looked at the evidence pouch. "Is that what I think it is?" "It's more than you think it is." Osei was quiet for a moment. "I read his after-action report 4 times, looking for what was wrong with it. You told me that. I didn't tell you what I found on the 5th read." Soren looked at her. "There's a timestamp, inconsistency. The report was filed at 0612. The coordinates that sent you out were transmitted at 0347. There's a gap of 2 hours and 25 minutes between when you left and when anyone could have known you were missing, unless someone was watching a channel they weren't supposed to be watching." "He was watching his own channel," Soren said. "I know. He knew when I left." "I know. He called in my KIA before I could have possibly been confirmed dead." "I know that too." Osei's voice was even, carefully, deliberately even, the voice of someone holding something very heavy with both hands. "That's why I'm here." Koda looked up at Osei for a long moment. Then he turned and looked north. Camp Baledogle was 31 kilometers away, say. Pharaoh was 31 kilometers away, in an office with dark windows and moving blinds, believing that the woman he had built and deployed and discarded was lying in a Somali riverbed, with a drive full of fabricated evidence pressed against her chest. Soren finished the water. She handed the empty bottle back to Osei. Tell me everything you saw in that report. Every word. Start from the beginning. She began to walk north. Osei fell into step beside her. Koda moved ahead. And for the first time in 18 hours, Soren Vale knew exactly what she was walking toward. Not safety, not rescue, not exoneration. She was walking toward a reckoning 31 kilometers away, carrying 2 drives, a dead man's name, and the precise, crystalline understanding that the most dangerous thing Pharaoh had ever done was teach her how to see clearly, because now she could see him. The gate opened without ceremony. No crowd this time, no soldiers drawn by rumor, and the particular gravity of something impossible walking out of the bush. Just the metal frame swinging inward on its hydraulic arm, and the sound of it. A low mechanical exhale, like something that had been holding its breath, finally letting go. Soren walked through. Slowly, more slowly than she intended. The ground inside the perimeter was the same red laterite as outside, but something about crossing the threshold made her legs register the full accounting of what she had asked them to do. 47 kilometers, no sleep, less than 2 liters of water shared between herself and a 60-pound dog, across 18 hours of moving through terrain that did not want to be moved through. She kept her spine straight by deciding to. That was all it was, at this point. Decision rather than capacity. Koda entered at her left knee. His gait was not precise. He was compensating heavily now. The discipline still there. The body underneath it filing its report. When he had come through the last kilometer, he had stumbled once on flat ground, caught himself, and continued without acknowledgement. She had not said anything. He would not have wanted her to. Osei saw it. Soren watched the older woman's eyes track from her face to Koda's foreleg, and back, doing the calculation, deciding not to say it out loud. Good call. There were things that needed to happen first. She could fall apart after. The base was quiet in the way that military installations were never actually quiet. Generators running, satellite equipment cycling, boots on gravel somewhere in the middle distance. But the kind of human noise that came from people going about the ordinary business of a morning had been replaced by something watchful. Word traveled fast in a place this size. They knew she was coming. Some of them, she understood now, had been told she was already dead. She did not look at their faces. She looked at the second floor of the operations building. Pharaoh's window was lit. Before you go up there, Osei said quietly, you should know how I found you. Koda's GPS unit, Soren said. His tracking harness was still pinging my wrist unit when my radio went down. You pulled the signal from the K9 system before Pharaoh could flag it. A pause. How long have you known? Osei asked. That you'd access the K9 tracking system? That I was going to come after you? Soren considered this for 3 steps. I didn't, she said. Yes, I say. But Koda did. Osei looked at the dog. Koda did not look back. He was watching the door of the operations building. He trusted you before I had reason to. That's not nothing. She stopped at the entrance to the intelligence annex. Not the operations building. Not yet. She needed 60 seconds and a working terminal. She needed to look at something that had been sitting at the edge of her mind since hour 14 of the walk. A detail so small she had almost dismissed it. The kind of thing that registered and then got filed away under deal with later because the body was moving and the ground was hard, and later was the only category with space left in it. Abdi's file had been thorough. 22 months of fabricated records, time-stamped and cross-referenced, and built with the precision of someone who understood intelligence architecture from the inside. Every access log, every communication record, every dead drop coordinate, all of it consistent with her clearance level, her posting history, her operational exposure, all of it, including one entry dated 14 months ago, a communication log attributed to her, a message sent from a personal device, not a secure terminal, to a number registered to a defunct telecommunications company in Nairobi. She had read it in Abdi's dim light and moved past it because there had been other things to read and limited time to read them. But the date had snagged on something. 14 months ago, she had been in Djibouti City, not at the base, at a cafe with a ceiling fan turning too slowly overhead, drinking bad coffee across from Pharaoh, who had leaned forward the way he always leaned forward when she spoke. She had not had her personal device with her. She had left it at the annex, charging, because Pharaoh had called the meeting on 40 minutes' notice, and she had walked out the door with only her secure phone. Whoever had sent that message had been at the annex while she was with Pharaoh, while Pharaoh had made certain she would be with him and not at the annex. The terminal came alive under her hands. She pulled the base access log for that date, 14 months ago. The annex keypad records every code entry, time-stamped to the second. She found what she was looking for in 40 seconds. The annex had been accessed at 13:47 hours. She had left at 13:12. The access code used was not hers. It belonged to someone with a standing clearance to the annex, someone whose presence there would not have triggered a flag, would not have appeared unusual, would not have been questioned by anyone passing by. She looked at the name attached to that code. She looked at it for a long time. Then she closed the terminal, stood up, and walked to the operations building. The hallway outside Pharaoh's office smelled like recycled air and old coffee, and the particular staleness of a space where someone had been awake for a very long time. Light came from under the door. Soren did not knock. She opened the door and walked in and closed it behind her. Koda entered with her, took 2 steps into the room and stopped. He sat. He did not take his eyes off Pharaoh. Pharaoh was behind his desk. He looked exactly as he always looked, pressed, composed. The particular stillness of a man who had spent 34 years in rooms where composure was the only currency that mattered. His hands were flat on the desk surface. His eyes moved to her face and stayed there. He did not reach for anything. He did not speak first. Neither did she. The silence lasted 11 seconds. She counted them the way she counted steps, not deliberately, just because her mind kept time whether she asked it to or not. On the 12th second, Pharaoh said, "You look like hell. I've been in it, twice. Once when your people tried to put me there. Once when I figured out why." He held her gaze. He did not deny it. That told her something she had already known but needed confirmed, that he was not going to perform innocence, that whatever happened in this room, it was going to be honest, which meant it was going to be worse than she had prepared for. "Sit down, Soren." "No. What do you have?" he asked, looking at the evidence pouch at her side. "The drive you sent me for, and a mirror copy with full metadata and chain of custody documentation." She paused. "And the annex access log from 14 months ago." Something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise, recognition. The look of a man watching a sequence of events arrive at the conclusion he had known was coming and had been unable to prevent. "How long?" she said. He didn't ask what she meant. "Since before you were recruited," he said. The room was very still. "Say that again." Not because she hadn't heard it, because she needed to hear it a second time in a human voice to confirm it was real. "The architecture for this operation was designed before I ever sat down across from you in that lecture hall." His voice was even, clinical. The voice he used in briefings when the information was bad and sentiment would not improve it. "You were identified as a candidate 18 months before I made contact. Your profile was built. Your clearance trajectory was modeled. The entire posting sequence, Stuttgart, then here, was constructed to give you the access history the file required." "You recruited me to frame me," she said. "I recruited you because I was told to," he said. The distinction landed in the room like something dropped from a height. She looked at him. He looked back. "Who told you?" Not a question. A demand. Someone who was in this position before me. Someone who understood, as I eventually understood, that the choice in this work is not between right and wrong. It's between what you do and what is done to you. That's not an answer. "No, it's not." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, stripped of something. The last layer of professional distance coming away like a bandage pulled too fast. "I have been doing this for 34 years. I have built assets, and I have burned them. I have told people they were exceptional because it was true, and because it was useful, and because in this work, those two things are never as separate as they should be. He paused. You were exceptional. That is not a lie, I told you. You also built a file that would have put me in a military prison for the rest of my life. Yes. While telling me I was the only person you trusted. Yes. The word fell into the room with the weight of everything it contained. What she felt was not anger. Anger required a gap between what you had believed and what was true, and that gap had been closing since hour 6 of the walk. What she felt instead was something colder and more precise. Clarity, the person above you. They're the reason the witness is dead. They're the reason you couldn't stop this, even after it started. Pharaoh looked at her for a long moment. 3 years ago, I tried to end the operation. I was shown what would happen if I did. Not to me. He stopped. To my daughter. The room absorbed this. Koda's ear rotated once toward the door. Soren did not look away from Pharaoh. His name. Give me a name. If I give you a name, Pharaoh said, you become the most dangerous person they have ever had to deal with. And they have dealt with very dangerous people. I already am. I just walked 47 kilometers through hostile territory, carrying evidence of a conspiracy that reaches above your pay grade. And I did it with a wounded dog, and no water, and 2 magazines. Whatever they think I am, they're behind. Something shifted in Pharaoh's face. Not admiration. Something older than admiration. Grief. His name is Mercer. Deputy Director Richard Mercer, Defense Intelligence Agency. Washington. He reached into his desk drawer. Soren's hand moved to her weapon. He placed a small, encrypted drive on the desk between them. Then he opened it on his terminal and turned the screen to face her. Before you decide anything, there's something you need to hear. An audio file. 12 seconds. Recorded in what sounded like a secure conference room, the specific acoustic flatness of a space built to contain sound. A voice she had never heard before. She recognized it anyway. The particular register of someone who had spent decades in rooms where their words became policy. The Somalia asset has outlived its operational value. If Vale surfaces, she becomes a liability, not a resource. Treat accordingly. A pause on the recording. Then another voice, younger, uncertain. Sir, she's one of ours. She was. File it under hostile attribution and close the thread. The file ended. Pharaoh closed it. That was recorded 4 days ago, 40 hours before he sent the team to the coordinates. She stood very still. Hostile attribution. The intelligence term for making a death look like it came from the other side. A body in the bush logged as a casualty of the operating environment. Clean. Deniable. Final. He was going to blame my death on Al-Shabaab, she said. Yes. Not a conspiracy in the abstract. A voice. A decision. 12 seconds of a man she had never met deciding she was a thread to be closed. That was Mercer. That was what days meant. I have been building this for 3 years, Pharaoh said, since the day they showed me what they would do to her. I kept building because the only way out is evidence that cannot be dismissed, cannot be buried, cannot be explained away. He looked at her steadily. I needed someone to carry it out. Someone clean. Someone whose file, once the fabrication was exposed, would make every piece of evidence I had collected unimpeachable by contrast. She stared at him. You set me up to be framed, so that when the frame fell apart, I would become the proof that Mercer's operation existed. The discrediting of the fabricated file combined with this drive is the complete case. Neither one works without the other. You used me. Yes. You put me in that field alone and let your contacts try to kill me. I gave you Abdi and I gave you time. That's not a plan. That's a hope. He didn't argue. I didn't control the ambush. I knew Mercer would send people. I didn't know how many or how fast. What I could control was the KIA filing, getting you off their active list before they could classify you as a retrieval target. He paused. Abdi was in place. Hirsi was in place. Those were contingencies, not guarantees. If you had gone down in the first hour, you would have lost your witness and your evidence simultaneously, she said. Yes, The word landed without defense. That's what 3 years of working inside this looks like. Not clean, not certain. I built what I could build, and I put it in front of someone who I knew would not stop moving. She looked at him for a long moment. You gambled my life on a character assessment. Yes, he did not apologize. She did not ask him to. Your daughter. What's her name? He blinked. The first involuntary thing she had seen him do in this entire conversation. The first thing that had moved in his face without being permitted to move. Eleanor, she's 9. Soren said nothing for a moment. She looked down at Koda. He was not looking at Pharaoh. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the middle distance between them, the space where the conversation lived, with the particular stillness of an animal that understood something was being decided and had chosen not to weigh in. She thought about Hirsi sitting under a dead tree for 3 weeks. She thought about what it cost a child to wait for something they had no power over. She looked back at Pharaoh. When this is over, she said, Eleanor doesn't grow up with her father in a cell. That's the deal. You give me everything. You testify to everything. And Eleanor doesn't pay for what you did. You don't have the authority to offer that. No. But I have the evidence. And the people who will receive it will want to witness more than they want a conviction. She held his gaze. Do we have a deal? Pharaoh looked at her for a long time. You're 26 years old, he said. Yes. And you just negotiated a plea arrangement with a senior intelligence officer while standing in his office covered in Somali bush dust with a wounded dog. The dog is fine, she said. Koda looked at Pharaoh. Pharaoh looked at the dog. Really looked. For the first time since they had entered the room, something shifted in his face, not softness, something older than softness. The expression of a man who had spent 34 years in rooms without windows, deciding the fates of people he would never meet, suddenly confronted with an animal that had no agenda, and no file, and no access code, and had simply decided 18 months ago to sit down beside a person and stay. Yes, we have a deal. She turned toward the door. Soren. She stopped, did not turn around. You were exceptional. I need you to know that part was never the lie. She stood with her hand on the doorframe. I know. That's what made it work. She walked out. Osei was in the hallway. She had not moved from the position she had taken when Soren went in, back against the wall, arms loose, the particular stillness of someone who had decided that whatever happened behind that door was not her business to interrupt. She looked at Soren. At the 2 drives. At the 3rd drive, Pharaoh's now in Soren's left hand. How bad? Osei said. It goes above him. Washington. Deputy director level. Osei was quiet for a moment. How far above? Far enough that we use his channel. And we use it now. Before anyone in this building makes a phone call. Osei straightened. The annex terminal? No. His terminal. His channel. His encryption. She looked at Osei. And I need one more thing. Name it. The name on the annex access log. 14 months ago. She held Osei's gaze. I need you to find that person and make sure they don't make a phone call in the next 20 minutes. Osei absorbed this. Just find them. That's all. Just find them and stay with them. And if they have already made the call. Soren looked down at Koda. He was looking up at her with the focused attention he reserved for moments when she was about to make a decision. Then we move faster, she said. 3 drives. She laid them on the desk in a row. Left to right, the fabricated file Pharaoh had sent her to retrieve. The mirror copy Abdi had built with chain of custody intact. And Pharaoh's drive. 3 years of evidence assembled in secret by a man who had been running out of options and time simultaneously. She sat in Pharaoh's chair. It felt nothing like she had expected it to feel. She had imagined, somewhere in the back of the long walk north, that sitting here would carry some weight of significance, that the body would register it as a moment distinct from other moments. It was just a chair, worn at the armrests, adjusted 2 inches lower than she needed, smelling faintly of the same bad coffee that seemed to permeate every room Pharaoh had ever occupied for more than an hour. She adjusted the seat height. She opened the terminal. The channel was exactly where Pharaoh had said it would be, buried 4 layers deep in a communications architecture that looked, on the surface, like routine satellite uplink maintenance logs. She would not have found it without the access sequence he had written on a folded piece of paper and left on the desk beside the drive. She looked at the channel designation, Direct Line, Senate Armed Services Committee, Oversight Division, encrypted at a level that sat above DIA infrastructure entirely, a separate system, built specifically for the kind of information that could not be allowed to pass through the channels it was intended to expose. She understood, looking at it, how long he had been planning this. Not 3 years. Longer. The channel architecture had a build date, 4 years and 2 months ago, 6 weeks before he sat down across from her in a Georgetown lecture hall. She did not let herself think about what that meant. Not yet. She plugged in the first drive. The fabricated file loaded in 11 seconds. 22 months of constructed history, her name threaded through every record like a wire designed to conduct current in one direction only. She tagged it, added Abdi's authentication certificate from the mirror drive, added the annex access log with the timestamp that proved the fabricated message had been sent while she was sitting across from Pharaoh in a cafe 3 kilometers away. She plugged in the second drive, Abdi's mirror, chain of custody documentation, metadata intact, the digital equivalent of a witness who could not be killed or intimidated or disappeared into a car accident on a Nairobi road. She plugged in the third, Pharaoh's 3 years, transfer records, communication intercepts, financial architecture tracing payments from a series of shell accounts in Cyprus and Bahrain back to a single originating source. A private equity fund registered in Delaware whose board of directors included, as a silent partner, Deputy Director Richard Mercer of the Defense Intelligence Agency. She read the last file before she sent it. A photograph. Mercer at a dinner in Georgetown, sitting across a table from a man whose face she recognized from the Al-Shabaab intelligence procurement files she had been studying for 4 months. The same files that documented the 17 compromised operations. The dinner had taken place 26 months ago, 11 months before the first American operation in the region was compromised. She looked at the photograph for exactly as long as it took her to memorize every detail of it. Then she began to upload. The upload bar moved with the patience of a system designed for security rather than speed. 4%. She watched it. 7%. Koda was at the door, positioned so he could see both the hallway and the room simultaneously. He had taken that position without being told. He had understood, without being briefed, that the next 20 minutes required a different kind of attention than the last 18 hours. 12%. Her wrist unit showed OC's tracker moving through the eastern residential block. Steady pace. Not running. The pace of someone who had located their target and was managing the situation without alarming it. She had not told Osei the name from the annex log. She had looked at it on the terminal screen and she had closed the terminal. And she had walked out because there were things that needed to happen in a specific order. And falling apart was not one of them. And falling apart was what she had been trying very hard not to do since the moment she had seen that name. 19%. The name on the annex access log was Captain James Okafor. Soren had known James Okafor for 14 months. He had been assigned to Camp Baledogle 6 weeks after she arrived, a signals intelligence officer, 31 years old, Lagos-born, American-educated, with a dry humor and an instinct for pattern recognition that had made him, in Soren's estimation, the most genuinely talented analyst she had encountered in the field. They had worked adjacent desks for 8 months. He had covered her shifts twice when she was sick. She had taught him the particular shortcut she used for cross-referencing SIGINT data across multiple classification levels, a method she had developed herself, never written down, never shared with anyone except him. That method appeared in the fabricated file, in a communication log attributed to her, sent from the annex on a day she had not been there. He had used her own technique to forge her work. He had been in that annex for 31 minutes, using an access code that had never triggered a flag, because signals intelligence officers had routine clearance to the space. And he had built the most convincing piece of the fabricated file using the one element that Abdi, working from data architecture alone, could never have supplied: her fingerprints, Not literal fingerprints, the cognitive fingerprints of the way she thought, the way she organized information, the patterns that were hers alone, that anyone who had worked beside her for 8 months, who had sat across from her at 0312 on a sleepless night and learned her shortcut and gone back to his desk and not fully slept since, would have absorbed simply by proximity. She had taught him how to think like her, and he had used it to destroy her. 28%. She became aware, distantly, that her jaw was tight. She made herself unclench it. She made herself breathe. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. The rhythm that kept the body functional when the mind was doing something it found intolerable. She pulled up the base communication log. She searched Okafor's access history for the last 40 minutes. He had logged into the secure communication terminal in the Signals Intelligence Suite at 0631 hours, 12 minutes after Soren had walked through the gate. She stared at the timestamp, 0631. She had entered the annex at 0634, 3 minutes. He had made a call 3 minutes before she sat down at that terminal. Ose. Location. The response came back in 4 seconds. Eastern Residential. Room 14. Door is closed. Is he inside? Affirmative. I can hear movement. He made a call at 0631. I need to know if that call went out or if it was intercepted by the base firewall. A pause. Longer than 4 seconds. Soren. Tell me. The base firewall logs an outgoing satellite call at 0631. Duration 42 seconds. Destination is a relay number. It's been bounced. I can't trace it from here. 42 seconds. Enough time to say she's back, she has the drive, she's in the building. Enough time for whoever received that call to begin moving whatever pieces they had left to move. She looked at the upload bar. 41%. Her wrist unit buzzed. Not the comm channel. The K9 tracking system. An alert she had configured herself 8 months ago and forgotten about until now. Someone had just pinged Koda's harness GPS from an external terminal. Not the base K9 system. Not her wrist unit. An external query. The kind that would only be run by someone trying to locate the harness in real time. She looked at the timestamp. 0743 hours. 4 minutes after the upload had begun. Ose. Base security. Now. Tell them we have unverified personnel on site and to lock the perimeter. On whose authority? Mine. And if they want to argue, tell them to call the Senate Armed Services Committee Oversight Office and ask for the woman who received a 4-drive evidence package at 0739 this morning. Ose moved. Koda was already at the door. The door to the operations building opened. She heard it from 2 floors up. The specific acoustic signature of that particular door, which had a hydraulic arm that needed recalibration and announced itself with a sound slightly lower in pitch than it should have been. Koda heard it before she registered what she had heard. He was on his feet, body toward the hallway, still. Not the slow tail movement of something known and safe, not the electric threat snap of the ambush. Something between, something she had not seen from him before. She stood up. She did not leave the terminal. 41%. The footsteps on the stairs were not hurried. That was the thing that told her the most. Not the number of them, not the weight of them, but the pace. Deliberate. Measured. The footsteps of someone who had decided that running would communicate something they did not want to communicate. She recognized the pace. She had walked beside it for 8 months. Okafor opened the door. He was in civilian clothes, off duty, which meant he had been in his quarters when Ose found him, which meant he had made the call and then gone back to his room and waited, the way you waited when you had done the thing you needed to do, and the outcome was now outside your control. He looked at her. She looked at him. The upload bar read 47%. Soren, he said. His voice was steady. Everything about him was steady. She had always admired that about him. The quality of his composure under pressure. The way he processed without showing process. She understood now where he had learned it. From watching her. James, she said. He stepped into the room. Did not close the door behind him. You should stop the upload, he said. Why? Because the channel isn't clean. Pharaoh told you it was isolated. It's not. Mercer built it. He built it specifically to capture exactly this kind of transmission, evidence packages assembled by people trying to expose the operation. It doesn't go to the Senate Oversight Office. It goes to a server in McLean, Virginia, that Mercer controls directly. The room was very quiet. 54%. "You're lying," she said. "I'm not. And you know I'm not, because you just ran the same analysis on that statement that you run on everything, and it fits. It fits the architecture. A man careful enough to build a 22-month fabrication is careful enough to build a false extraction channel for the evidence that might expose him." She looked at the upload bar. She looked at Okafor. "Then why are you telling me?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Because I was recruited 9 months ago." And I said yes, because they told me you were already working for them, that you had been since Stuttgart, that everything you did here was directed. He stopped. I believed them. I had no reason not to. The file was complete. The access logs were consistent. The methodology was yours. I know how you think. It looked exactly like you. "You built the most convincing part of the fabrication," she said. "I know. Using a method I taught you." "I know." And this time the word had weight to it, the weight of something that could not be given back. Koda moved. Not toward Okafor. Not away from him. He walked to the center of the room and sat down between them, looking at neither of them. "Watching the door. The real channel. You know where it is." "Yes. Because you were supposed to intercept anything sent through Pharaoh's channel and redirect it." "Yes." "And instead you came up here." He held her gaze. "The witness. Hirsi's father. He's dead." "I know. I found out 3 weeks ago. I found out how." He paused. "I have a son. He's 11. The room held this. The real channel. Tell me." He told her. She did not close Pharaoh's upload. She let it run. 61%, 68%, 74%, feeding directly into Mercer's server in McLean, as Okafor walked her through the secondary architecture, a channel so thoroughly hidden that it had no interface of its own, accessed only through a specific sequence, entered into what appeared to be a routine satellite calibration terminal in the signals intelligence suite 1 floor below. A terminal that only Okafor had access to among everyone currently in this building. 79%. "If I walk out of this room, Mercer's people may already be moving." They are. The call I made at 0631. Kimra. I know about the call. It wasn't to Mercer. It was to a journalist. Washington Post. National Security Desk. I've been building a parallel record for 6 weeks. Everything I had access to. Everything I could document. He reached into his jacket and produced a drive, smaller than the others, gray casing, a strip of electrical tape along one edge. "This goes with yours. It's independent sourcing." A second voice saying the same thing from a different direction. She looked at the drive. She looked at him. Koda turned his head and looked at Okafor for the first time since entering the room. His tail moved once. Low, controlled. Not a threat. 88%. She picked up Okafor's drive. She stood. "Ose, I need you at the signals intelligence suite. 1 floor down. Now." She looked at Okafor. "You're going to open the terminal. You're going to walk me through the sequence, and then you're going to stay in this building until people arrive who have the authority to decide what happens to you." "I know. Whatever they decide, you don't fight it." "I know that too." 94%. She picked up all 4 drives. She walked to the door. Koda fell in at her left knee without being called. The movement so practiced, so automatic, that it had stopped feeling like a trained behavior long ago and had become simply the way things were, the way they moved through the world, together with him slightly ahead, watching what she could not watch, and her slightly behind, understanding what he could not understand, and the space between them the exact width of 18 months of a partnership that had never required explanation. She stopped at the doorway. She did not turn around. "James." "Yeah." "The technique I taught you. The cross-referencing method." "Yes." "You improved it. The version in the fabricated file was faster than mine, more elegant." A long silence. "I had 8 months to practice," he said. "When this is over," she said, "I want to know how you did it." She walked out. The terminal looked like every other terminal in the building. That was the point. Okafor entered the sequence with the hands of someone who had memorized it so completely that the body no longer needed the mind's involvement. The way Soren counted steps. The way Koda read the wind. The interface that appeared was clean. Minimal. A single upload field and a destination address, and an encryption confirmation that cycled through 3 independent verification layers before it would accept a package. She uploaded everything, all 4 drives. Pharaoh's 3 years, Abdi's mirror, her own documentation, the annex log, the timestamp, the GPS record of every step of 47 kilometers reconstructed from Koda's tracking harness, and Okafor's independent sourcing. 6 weeks of parallel documentation assembled by a man trying to find a way out of a room he had walked into voluntarily and discovered too late had no door. The upload took 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Nobody spoke. Ose stood at the door with the stillness of someone who had decided that what was happening at the terminal was not her business, and the hallway was. Koda sat at Soren's left knee and watched the room. When the confirmation came through, 3 green indicators, sequential, the system's equivalent of a held breath finally released, Soren sat back in the chair and looked at the ceiling. The ceiling was the same prefabricated tile as every other ceiling in every other building on this base. She looked at it for a long time. "It's done," Ose said from the doorway. "It's done. What happens now?" Soren thought about this. What happened now was that a package had landed in the hands of people with the authority and the mandate to do something with it. What happened now was that Richard Mercer, in an office in Washington, would eventually become aware that something had moved through a channel he thought he controlled and arrived somewhere he had not intended. What happened now was that Pharaoh was sitting 2 floors up in a worn chair, waiting for a consequence he had been building toward for 4 years. What happened now was that Hirsi was somewhere 12 kilometers east of the main road, living with an aunt, carrying the particular weight of a child who had done the right thing and would spend the rest of his life not knowing if it had mattered. What happened now was that none of it was finished. Mercer was not in handcuffs. The operation had not been dismantled. The 17 red markers on the map in the annex were still red. She had sent the evidence. She had not ended anything. She had started something, a process that would move through institutions and lawyers and classified hearings and the specific grinding machinery of accountability when accountability was applied to people who had spent careers learning to avoid it. It might take years. It might be buried. It might surface and shift and change shape in ways she could not anticipate from a signals intelligence suite in Djibouti at 0745 hours. "Now we wait," she said. She found a wall. Not a significant wall. Not a wall with any tactical or architectural importance. Just the eastern perimeter barrier, the side of the base that faced away from the operations buildings and faced instead toward empty ground, and, beyond that, the particular quality of morning light that existed over the Horn of Africa for approximately 40 minutes each day before the sun climbed high enough to burn it away. She sat with her back against it. Koda lay down beside her. Not the alert sitting position, not the threat-ready stance. He lay down, with the full weight of his body against the ground and his head on her left leg, and his eyes half closed, the ear still rotating slowly, but the rest of him finally, briefly, at rest. She looked at the light. She thought about Pharaoh saying you were exceptional, and meaning it and also using it. She thought about the fact that both of those things were true simultaneously, and that she would have to find somewhere to put that. Not today, but eventually, in whatever came after. She still was. That was the thing she had not expected to feel at the end of this. Not vindicated, not exonerated, not relieved. Still herself. After everything that had been built around her, and against her, and in her name. After the fabricated file, and the ambush, and the 47 kilometers, and the confrontation, and the upload, and all of it. She was still the person who counted steps when her mind drifted. Still, the person who had left her personal device charging and walked out of the annex on 40 minutes' notice because Pharaoh called and she trusted him. Still the person Koda had chosen. She did not know yet if that was enough. She suspected it was going to have to be. Her secure phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. Encrypted. Domestic routing, stateside. She answered. Silence for 2 seconds. Then a voice she did not recognize. Female. Measured. The voice of someone accustomed to saying important things in unremarkable tones. Lieutenant Vale. Speaking. We received your package, all 4 components, verified. A pause. Just that. Nothing added. Nothing explained. In intelligence work, Soren had learned, the people who said the least were usually the ones who understood the most. Who am I talking to? She asked. Someone who has been waiting 11 months for a complete picture. You just gave us one. Mercer is aware something has moved. He does not yet know where it landed. That window is closing. We are already moving. How long? Days. Not weeks. Not months. Not the slow institutional grind she had been bracing herself for. Days. The people here are being handled. All of them. She understood, from the way it was said, that this included Pharaoh, that it included Okafor. That somewhere in a process she could not see and would not be asked to manage, the decisions about what happened next to every person in this building were already being made by people with the authority to make them. That was not comfort exactly, but it was something. Lieutenant Vale. The voice shifted, not warmer but more direct, the tone of someone moving from preamble to the actual point. When this is resolved, we are going to need people who understand how this operation worked. From the inside. Are you going to stay in the field? She looked down at Koda. His head was still on her leg. His eyes had opened. He was looking up at her with the focused attention that meant he was already listening, already reading the quality of her stillness, already prepared to move in whatever direction she decided to move. Yes, she said. Good. The call ended. Her wrist unit buzzed once more. A text. Encrypted. From the same domestic number. 4 words. Mercer moved 2 aircraft. She looked at it. Then she looked at Koda. Days, she said quietly. He held her gaze with the focused patience of an animal that had decided 18 months ago that wherever she was going was where he was going, and had not reconsidered that decision once. She put the phone face down on the ground beside her. The aircraft were already in the air, or they weren't. The evidence was already in the right hands, or it wasn't. She had done what she could do. What came next was not hers to control. That was the hardest thing she had ever had to learn, and she suspected she was going to have to keep learning it for the rest of whatever came after this. The light held for another few minutes. Then the sun climbed, and it burned away, the way it always did, and the morning became an ordinary morning, hot and loud, and full of the particular noise of a bass that had been awake all night and was now trying to remember how to be a normal place. Koda did not move. His weight against her leg was the same weight it had been for 18 months. She did not move either. Not yet. She had 47 kilometers behind her, and an unknown distance ahead, and for the next few minutes, there was nothing she was required to do except sit against a wall in the early morning with a German shepherd's head on her leg and let herself be, for a moment, simply a person who had made it back. She would stand up soon. She always did. But not yet.